Tor House. The cottage within. The interior of Tor House is so thoroughly empaneled that, standing within, one would hardly guess that the house is made of stone. The dark redwood absorbs much of the light that the windows let in. In general, we will find the interiors of the buildings that Jefferses would later build to be much stonier. The entrance to Tor House is guarded by Una's command center, which, to Una's left, is equipped with windows facing two separate directions. To Una's right are the views provided by the living room windows. To her right we also see one of her four melodeons. A page in Una's book of Irish music, illustrated by her husband, the poet, features the tower in Western Ireland that the poet William Butler Yeats restored, a project which Yeats dedicated to his wife. On this page, Robinson Jeffers draws a correspondence between Yeats and himself. From her command center, Una could also keep an eye, or rather an ear, on her husband. His desk was in the attic above hers, and he would occupy his mornings there writing poetry, often on Una's orders. She could hear him pace across the boards above her head, and if things got too quiet for her liking, she might grab a broomstick and tap the boards above her head to remind her husband what he was up there for. It is not at all certain that Jeffers would have matured as a poet without Una. Una's Steinway baby grand piano dominates the view west, though Una preferred to play her melodeons, likely because they were a better fit for the rural tone which she strove for. Una called this tone an illusion, but she considered it necessary. Still, the Steinway remains a dominant presence. Above the piano, on the west wall, we see a painted portrait of Jeffers' granddaughter Una, who graced the poet's heart with meaning after his wife died. Because of the primitivist program of Una Jeffers and her husband, Tor House was lit by candles and kerosene lamps, had no gas heating, and would not have electricity until 1949. Metal plates still protect the low ceilings where kerosene lamps once hung. It's too easy to forget just how laborious housework could be before the advent of electricity, particularly when it comes to doing the laundry. It has been suggested that the chief technology of modernity is the washing machine, for it clearly liberated millions upon millions of women. But Una, having gained domestic expertise from her Midwestern upbringing, was quite able to forsake her LA fast lane and take on the job of a rural house mother. An exception that proves this rule is the local rumor that Una could occasionally be spotted carrying her laundry down the road to the house of her ex-husband. He had followed her to Carmel and had his own Tor House built on Una's property line. His Tor House was more of a Tor castle, and it had electricity. In addition to all that Una put herself through, there were also times when Una put Robin to work. For instance, she insisted at one point that they get their milk from their own animals, and so some goats were acquired. For some time it was Robin's daily chore to round them up. A cupboard by the fireplace once served as a pistol box until Una moved the guns up to bedside in the attic. A skull and a miniature club-wielding giant then replaced the pistols. In the early years out on the point, the Jeffers family were quite alone on their property, hidden behind the wall of trees that Robin had planted for solitude. Even today, Carmel can be a little creepy at night due to its lack of street lights. Una's father had been a sheriff, and she may have inherited something of his character. The relative solitude of Carmel Point sometimes left Una feeling vulnerable, and she could be dangerous when cornered. The jazz poet Langston Hughes, a friend of Robin and Una, once shared a story he'd heard from the local Carmelite nuns. The story went that Una had discharged a gun at a trespasser at point-blank range. Taking this tall tale at face value, we must conclude that Una was an incredibly bad shot, unless there's a trespasser buried in the courtyard. I don't suppose that's his skull in the cupboard. Another anecdote relates how Una reacted upon hearing glass break in the night. She straightway handed a rifle to Robin and sent him downstairs. Obediently, Robin descended the steep attic stair and stood guard by the hearth. Una would occasionally call down to check on Robin's status, which was always encouraging, until finally he gave no answer. Una at last had to go down and investigate, only to find her husband fast asleep, cradling the rifle. What was once Una's kitchen has been a library since her son Donnan converted the garage to a kitchen in 1954. The Jeffers family dictionary and encyclopedia have been moved here. These were important writing references for Jeffers. He may have also used the encyclopedia as a stonemasonry reference. If you look closely at the far door, you'll notice scratch marks where the family dogs would ask to be let out. For this was the back door of the house for the first 11 years or so, before Robin completed the dining extension. The kitchen door to the bathroom, like so many other vertical surfaces in Tor House, is adorned with wisdom, in this case some sage advice about resource sharing. Though kitchens don't generally have doors to bathrooms in modern homes, such proximity is convenient when hot water must be carried from the kitchen stovetop to the bathtub. Tor House did not have a modern water heater. The bathroom is also located adjacent to the guest room. This was convenient for guests, but not so much for the Jeffers family, who slept in the attic. The only bedroom in this little cottage was not used as a bedroom until the 1940s. It was not large enough for a family of 4, so the Jeffers family slept up in the attic. Tor House collected quite a guest list over the years. That list included actors, novelists, dramatists, musicians, dancers, philosophers, and, of course, poets. A few of them stayed the night. Even Clint Eastwood spent a night at Tor House, but that was just a movie. The quilt that covers the bed was the work of Robin's mother and her sister Mary. It's probably over 130 years old, so don't touch. Even Clint didn't get to touch it. Many pithy quotations are written on the walls, cabinets, and beams of Tor House. One is written here in French above the closet door. An English translation for this phrase might be, "Do well and let 'em talk." One fascinating item on the walls of this room is a sampler stitched by Una's grandmother, Elizabeth Donnan, at Ballyministra, Ireland, back in 1836. Elizabeth was only 15 years old at the time. For the project, Elizabeth prepended her personal couplet to an English translation of a medieval Jewish poem. The room's ultimate purpose, as the place of the family's deathbed, was revealed in 1932 by the poem that lies framed by the bedside, The Bed by the Window. It is one of Jeffers' most playful poems. In this poem, while the deathbed patiently waits for the arrival of the reaper, houseguest after houseguest slumbers, blissfully unaware of the grim purpose of the bed. The irony is enough to give one visions of Vincent Price. It seems quite clear that the point of this poem is not to be morbid, but rather light-hearted, even casual about death. To Jeffers, death is something to be regarded with crystalline interest rather than with longing or dread. Death is at last a patient demon, neither to be desired nor feared. The poet did ultimately die in this bed on Saturday, January 20th, 1962, at 3:40 in the afternoon. It is said he died while looking out the sea window toward Point Lobos. Just as it snowed when he'd been born, it snowed the night he died. This wasn't a slight dusting of snow that melts before it meets the ground. It was a record snowfall. So much snow fell that it collected on the ground, and even caused that year's celebrity golf tournament at Pebble Beach to be postponed. This odd coincidence, or grand tribute from the gods, has been ranked one of the top 10 moments in Pebble Beach history by Golf Magazine. Likewise, 1962 is remembered by many of those who were alive in Central California at the time as the year of the snow. Next up, an arch and a tower. Schedule a tour of Tor House at torhouse.org. This independent, unaffiliated presentation was produced in support of the Robinson Jeffers Tor House Foundation. The views expressed herein are not necessarily those of the Foundation. Your support for Tor House is appreciated.